Want to learn how I make art? So do I. Please help. Alright, so hello again for those returning, and hi for those just coming in. It is I, CJ. Today, we will be delving into my art processes. Although I am not usually the best at explaining them, I work straight ahead and get very deep into the zone when I start making progress on a piece and don't always take time to break down what I am doing or why I am doing it. So this video is to help me do that better and ramble about inspirations, my thought process, brush choices, and more while making my work. Keep in mind, I am not a master nor a teacher, just a person on the internet who likes being an artist and wants to yap about their work. Now, as for what we will be focusing on, I will be going over a few art pieces I made related to Deltarune to help concentrate the video. I initially wrote this script to be a more general tour of my non-fandom art pieces, but I found that I have too much art I'd want to talk about for that to have been concise at all. I enjoyed Chapter 5 a lot, and with it prayerfully still being a talked about topic, why not take advantage and make a relevant video? I hope you enjoy what you see, and I find what I say here helpful to your own art processes. Now without further ado, let's begin! Okay, starting off, I made this piece sometime after completing Chapter 5 of Deltarune and learning about how the weird route continues onwards at the dreaded lake, which is what this piece is called, by the way, Lake. I saw lots of gorgeous art depicting the unsettling scene made beautifully ominous by the golden hour lighting. These pieces did the emotions of Noel's mental descent and Chris's forced compliance to the player's will do justice. I also saw art pieces that took a more abstract spin on the concept using wildly different compositions, textures, and the like that I wanted to engage in my own drawing. Now, transitioning to the actual process, I started simple, taking an ink brush in Procreate and laying out Noel, Chris, and a little lake at sunset, all still in grayscale. This would be the focal point of the composition that all other elements would serve to enhance. I also found it more interesting if it seemed as if Chris was the only one drowning while Noel stood above the water, wanting to see where that would go thematically as I worked. Knowing that the player's influence sets the scene into motion, I knew there needed to be some hard shape in reference to the soul and that control. For that, what would be better than someone making a hard shape with their hands centering the scene? I also wanted to drive home the discarded nature of Chris in particular during the weird route as they fall away from the player's heart hands, floating in the negative space around them, while Noel remains in frame of them. I almost wanted it to be Noel and Chris holding hands as they descended, but I pulled away from the idea just cause I simply did not want to draw it. While settling on that, I felt the hands making the heart were pretty empty and weren't being used in the composition that much outside of framing the main lake scene. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun if in one hand Noel is gleefully drowning and in the other Chris is in horrified pain? I didn't realize this at the time, but it was a good call to the comedy and tragedy theater masks and perfectly illustrates how both respectively see the situation. I briefly scrapped it though because it just felt cluttered and flat and I didn't know how to integrate it super well, so I decided to leave it alone and focus on finishing my composition and fleshing out my ideas. I included Chris's knife at the top of the composition, also in the negative space distant from their own hands as to remark further on their lack of control. I would also go on to add telephone poles and pine trees alongside Chris at the bottom of the piece. I've seen the iconography used in other art pieces related to death and her being lost, so I felt it was pretty fitting here, especially since Noel and Chris do get lost in their own way in the weird route. At a point, I placed red inside of the heart shape to directly reference the soul, making the space outside of them white instead, but I didn't really love it and then tried to do the same to the sun, but I felt similarly uncomfortable with it. So I just returned everything back to what it once was, and I also tried to play with the idea of Chris being more visible in the main focus of the piece, and even Noel being more visibly sunken, but did not want to try to figure that out. I tried to decorate the hands too, giving them fingernails, holes representing you-know-who, but I thought it was just all a little bit too much. With the experimentation over, I decided to outline the heart shape in red and included the small red dot still inside of Noel. I detailed the lake, trees, and sun some more with a crayon brush to add texture and render the scene properly. Bluish-gray crayon textures were also applied to the hands to make them less flat. I also filled the space outside of the hands with more fiery oranges, reds, and magentas since Chris is going through their own personal hell, after all. Right around here is where a light bulb hit for the story that the piece tells, and how to reincorporate the idea of Chris and Noel drowning in the hands. Starting with the story, I drew in the red door that can only be seen in the Chapter 3 secret boss that details the weird route, and drew Noelle taking the key from a drowning Chris. I thought about the extra character details Toby Fox wrote about Noelle seeking out and embracing bugs of games, and how the door she could never open in Dragon Blazers always eluded her. But now, through the events of the weird route, she can now open that door and see what is on the other side. Recently, I watched a Deltarune theory video that made note of how when Weird Route players make Noelle stronger, she resists when they try to tell her no to going deeper into the lake. The video was on how Noelle and Cara paralleled, and now after finishing the piece, and having that video in mind, I now like the idea that once you've given Noelle so much power, similar to Cara, who is to say that at some point Noelle resists being used and opts to see for herself what she's always wanted to, regardless of what you as a player want anymore. And as for the idea of the hands, I was commissioned some time ago to draw lovers with a red string of fate intertwining them. With both the heteronormative horror depicted in the weird route, alongside strings being used to communicate control at points in the game, what if the strings were entangled around the player's fingers representing tragic fate? What if they were shaped around the hands to reveal the visages of their pawns, a smiling Noelle and a terrified Chris as the air bubbles escape their throats? Fun ideas. So I unhid the layer the initial drawing was on, made the line art red, and added some more lines interlacing the fingers. I also made their faces white for the whole comedy tragedy mask thing. I also used liquify on some white marks that I made with a pencil brush but lowered the opacity of to try to simulate that underwater lighting effect to further drive home that they are being submerged. It was a little awkward, but I didn't really hate it all that much. And so with that, the art piece was finished and the artist was used up. As for personal main takeaways from this piece, firstly, start with the simple idea, and if a twist on the depiction of that idea interests you, pursue it and see what happens. Noelle seemingly drowning Chris pulled me in more so than the both going down together, and then this came out of that. Secondly, if a piece you're working on feels flat, experiment with textured brush sets to get more visual appeal and edges out of the piece, and explore different types of rendering. Before I implemented the pencil or crayon-like textures, I used ink brushes just to simply put down things like the lake or the hands, but it was really boring to look at, and the sun setting beyond the lake was really hard to see. Exploring different textures got me excited to keep working, made unclear visuals clearer, and taught me a little bit more about the brushes that I choose to use. And thirdly, do not be scared to put an idea down if it isn't working or you don't know how to re-implement it. Maybe you'll figure out a way to reincorporate it later on in the piece, if not in a redo. I got lucky and was able to make the strings of fate with Chris and Noelle's drowning images work, but I wish I found a better way to show they are submerged other than the air bubbles and liquefied markings, and it handled those effects in the hands better. Just things to keep in mind if I do any drawings with any similar elements next time. And remember, you can always move on to a new piece and try again. Matter of fact, let's try that advice right now and move on to the next piece. I had an assignment in my portfolio course this past spring semester that saw me creating 20 illustrations to display at semester's end. This piece, Nights, and the one after this piece that we will be talking about next were both drawn for this assignment. I had Deltarune alongside other fandoms on the brain and used that assignment to do a lot of fan art. It was very, very fun. I did have to work pretty quickly though because I had other coursework I needed to see to, so my motto was simply start a piece, take as long as you need to finish it, and once you can sign it, move on. I only ever revisited a concept once to revise it due to being really unhappy with it, but if I felt neutral or positive, it was good enough, and it was time to keep moving. This piece came about during my spring break because I was on a car trip and had a really good idea for it, being Chris sealing a dark fountain and maybe the visages of death and the roaring night above them. I could barely start on it though because I forgot my Apple Pencil at home, though I had my iPad and could start scribbling a little bit with my finger. I still had to wait a little longer to actually tackle and finish it though. Transitioning into the process, starting with brushes instead of the actual piece, I was wanting to experiment with grittier brushes in Procreate like the Peacock brush and one other one that I just cannot remember for the life of me right now. I've mainly used ink brushes like the Inka brush and wanted to engage something a little more freeform and fun as to further develop my art arsenal. Using these grittier brushes made laying out and decorating this composition so fun and similar to Lake created more visual interest. Now, talking about the actual process, the sketch started similar to the last one. A simple figure standing in the distance from squiggly lines representing some kind of water. I built up the colors of the fountain and reflection from there and put some darker navy blue, grayish blue hills and sands to the sides of it to start centering the main shot and laying out a little bit of scenery. I detailed Chris a little bit more and then added the soul with an outline around it as for it to not blend in with the fountain, and introduced the roaring knight at the top of the composition fitting to their imposing figure. I then placed a vague representation of Des between the two. While detailing the aforementioned focuses of the piece, I compressed the fountain a bit by adding a little more negative space to the sides of it to more strictly focus the knights in the picture. Rewatching the footage now, I miss the more open sky representing the fountain, but I still really do love the end result. Speaking to the colors in the piece, which I feel are the highlight of this, darkness clashing with saturated and eye-catching rainbow colors simply had to happen. Chris, Susie, and Ralphie standing in front of the main fountain on the game's main menu in Deltarune is a very gorgeous visual, and I was really happy to start taking my own spin on that. The piece's main focuses, including some background and foreground elements, are all drawn using these darker blues or blue-tinted grays to create a strong contrast and force your eye to the center. I use yellow at the base of the fountain to center Chris in the soul, so when looking at the piece from a distance, the roaring knight and Des catch your eye first, then Chris isn't ignored. As you move up, it turns from yellow to orange to magenta to blue. It calls to the color changing that the fountains already do in Deltarune at the end of the Dark World portion of a chapter. It was also fun to use that to play with experimental reflections on the roaring knight's armor using the gritty brushes to put more shine into them. I also dotted the fountain's colors in the dark hill sandy area around the fountain to suggest flowers. I also just noticed while watching the footage back that those help also bring attention to Chris as well. Same thing for the reflection of the fountain's light behind Chris too. With that, the fountain was formed and the art piece was finally finished. The key takeaways from this piece were as follows. Firstly, it's okay if an idea is quick or feels too easy. Not every art piece needs to be such a labor that it kills you. As much as I liked working on this, I felt it was too simple for a school assignment and could have been more ambitious, which the last piece in this video definitely is. I still learned something about stronger compositions and effectively using color to help carry and guide to your subjects. And on that, second takeaway is, hey, you don't need to use a million colors and hues and textures to make a good piece of art. It's alright if you get results with a limited palette and brush kit that you love as opposed to trying to use everything under the sun to prove your skill. It can end up as a mess if you don't try to pull back a little bit. And speaking of a mess, as much as I love the next and final piece for today, I do have complaints that prayerfully we all can learn from. So let's go. The last piece in this video, the dragon and the prince, was made for the same reason Knights was, as I had Deltarune on the brain and needed to get my 20 illustrations done for the class I was taking. I don't remember if this piece or Knights came first, though checking Cara, it seems this one did. Don't quote me. But I wanted to make something more ambitious and effortful to engage an art piece that required more thought and careful structuring and building. As for inspirations, the weird route theories enveloped my mind once again. It's not an unpopular interpretation that at some point in that path, things get into the chapter 3 secret boss that the player may take Chris and Noelle and make them turn against Susie and Rousey. There might be a confrontation and a battle from that, there might not be, but the idea that there could be was enough to get the creativity flowing. A piece that depicts a monstrous Susie and Rousey fighting against the tiny yet mighty trio that is Chris, Noelle, and the player, represented by the soul, captured me and didn't let me go. And so, I proceeded to get started. Getting into the process, I started with a very rough sketch of the general composition. Chris and Noelle on a small cliff with the former holding up the red and glowing soul. Susie and Rousey loom overhead with Rousey prepping some kind of spell or magic. I did forget about Susie's axe for a bit and did not incorporate it until later in the composition, which did cause issues I will expand more on in the takeaways. After laying out everything well enough in the sketch, I then moved on to roughly blocking everyone out, including the cliff Chris and Noelle were standing on, in different colors, overlaying my sketch to make sure my shapes were accurate and that I could place where everybody was. Once I was comfortable with everything, I started to dress Susie up, playing with making her more monstrous and like a dragon with horns to lean into a feralness, but backed off of it. I didn't like it all that much. And after resigning myself to just giving her her regular outfit, I gave Rousey his most shining feature. His face, seeing as how before he was just a hand and a couple of green and red shapes. I also gave him the yellow orb representative of miscellaneous magic just to put that in the shot too. I also wanted to play with giving him curl the horns at the sides of his head just because I would see that in fan concepts for Rousey's design. I thought it was a fun thing to include. Now, speaking to the emotions of the piece, I knew a fight like this would be one where Susie would be deeply hurt and struggling with having to battle people she once thought could be real friends to her. So even though she looks more feral, I still wanted her eyes to communicate a grief and a sorrow in what might be a teary whimper or a small roar, which I really like how that came out in the final composition. But Rousey, on the other hand, is more cold, eyes laser focused on the three. He was originally meant to be teary-eyed and as visibly distraught as Susie, though more distant as if he's trying to focus on doing his duty more than drowning in the pain of the moment. Referencing how the weird route is this unnatural or unintended path, I thought it'd be nice if maybe Susie and Rousey were seemingly acting unlike themselves. But I don't really love how Rousey's expression looks in the final piece, and I wish I had kept him being more visibly sad as well. Moving on, I filled in Chris, Sol, and Noelle's details a little bit more, giving Noelle what I personally thought the jingle square would look like to have her in a more offensive position, just to get the ball rolling on putting them in the piece. I then detailed Rousey and Susie a bit more before resizing the canvas to include Susie's axe and fill in more abstract foreground and background elements. There was a lot of experimentation here, trying to draw different mountain shapes in the foreground, adding cloudy and wispy shapes to add more of like interesting elements around the composition, and trying to create some vague resemblance of a background. When depicting the intense and ominous power of the red soul, I put a lot of wispy red effects that streaked upwards around Noelle and Chris, adding some snowflakes in there as well, because why not? Rousey's yellow orb turned into a wispy fire spell, and I tried to envelop the sharp end of Susie's axe in the flames to call attention to it, since it got buried in everything I was drawing and the handle wasn't really even visible anymore. Focusing more on Rousey's magic fire, I think I got too ambitious with the coloring and light because it pulls a lot of attention towards itself. I added some arcs that headed towards Noelle and Chris to help direct back to them, and then Rousey and Susie's faces, but it still reads as a little bit of a mess to me anyway, regardless. Thankfully, Noelle and Susie have similar colors to the fireball, namely Noelle's hair and Susie's fire breath, to help the issue with balance, but I still felt I kind of struggled regardless of that. Oh, and I gave Susie the mouth flames to hone in on her role as a dragon in Deltarune and because it looked cool. At some point, I removed Noelle's sword, though I really cannot remember why. I think it has something to do with visual clutter and all of the red that surrounds Noelle and Chris with the light of the soul, but regardless of that, I finished the piece and just used gradient maps and blending modes to add lighting and add more darkness and shadow to the piece. I also changed the hue and saturation to bring everyone a little closer to how their colors actually look in game, though I missed Susie's deeper purple before I shifted things around. Now, as for the takeaways, the most important ones in this video actually. First, treat the sketching phase with more importance. Anything unclear about the sketch or direction will show up in the final piece as you are working. I lost detail on Susie's axe and Rousey's scarf that I wish I had kept, and I would have liked Rousey's expression to have been stronger. On top of that, Rousey's fireball took too much focus away from the whole piece and wasn't elemented the best. If I had better drafted these elements out or thought a little longer earlier on, I probably would have been able to settle on something that made me more happy and content. I am not saying you need to draw a perfectly lined rendition of your final piece, but please get clear on your vision for an artwork before hashing it out with the details and losing out on features you wanted to include. Heck, you can still figure things out as you move into blocking colors and filling out finer aspects of your art, but try to fight it out sooner versus later. And secondly, chase the big idea. I am very happy with how this piece came out. I love the textures, the colors, the expressions, the symbolism, all of it. And while I wish aspects were clearer or stronger, I do not hate it at all. And now that I've made it, I know what I can work on and have the comfort knowing that I can create more complicated and in-depth stuff. I get that some people back off of more ambitious pieces and projects out of fear, if not feeling overwhelmed from all they'd have to learn, how quick or how slow they learn certain things at all, and feeling like that they don't have the time to really struggle with that at all. Or even just thinking their idea is stupid and not worth pursuing. But if you never do it, you cannot learn from it. You won't know what to change or what aspects of the artwork or project may need work or more exploration. Doing something bigger than you've ever had before is hard, but you should do it anyway, because once it's out, we can go somewhere from that. Keeping yourself from exploring and developing for whatever reason only hurts you. If you remember anything from this video, please invest in your processes as hard as you can and do all that you can with them. It will make you stronger, and eventually, even the most ambitious projects will not derail you, they will embolden you. Alright, and that is it. I hope you had fun learning about my Deltarune art and listening to me articulate my processes when making everything. This was a nice exercise for me to be able to talk about my pieces, and I'm happy I was able to share a little bit about a game that I like while doing it. Tell me which art piece you liked in the comments most and why, and you could also let me know if my takeaways and art explanations were helpful and what you may want to do with them. And please, feel free to give advice to other artists in the comment section. If you'd like to support and follow me, my social media links and shop links are in the description below, and as of releasing this video, VGen commissions are open. I think that is all I have to say for now, so thanks for watching, and I appreciate the time you spent hearing me ramble. See you whenever.